Do you consider yourself a seeker of truth? One that's above the worldly things, the material aspects of life? If you answered yes, you might call yourself a spiritual being. You might believe that life is spiritual and that having an interest in material things is of a so-called lower nature, that it's egoic to assign value to these aspects of life. But I like to point out that reality is not exactly spiritual, and actually it's not material either. These are both theories of the world, and they're not the world itself. They're just concepts, they're ideas. They're constructions of words and pictures in our imagination to help us understand the world and make distinctions within it. The real world is not words or pictures in our imagination. It's not an idea. The real world is not a concept or a theory. The real world just is, and that's all there is to it. It's an ongoing happening and it encompasses everything. Anytime we try to define it, we're actually taking ourselves further away from it. That's because you cannot define something in terms of itself. You can only explain what it's like. And that's the furthest words, pictures, ideas, and theories can take us. They're like a signpost that points us in a particular direction to get somewhere. If we get hung up on the signpost, we're likely to sit there with the sign instead of going to the place we're trying to get to. That's the nature of words and ideas. They're merely signposts that point us in a direction to help us understand something. They're not the destinations themselves. This goes for terms like ego and terms like higher self and lower self also. These words are used to create distinctions, not to create separation. The words separation and distinction are very closely related, but I like to point out that they're not the same thing. We can identify a difference and acknowledge it without creating a sense of separation or division. That's what a distinction is. We recognize the two things are different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're separate or opposed to one another. There's a distinction between an individual's arm and leg, but they're still connected. However, when we say things are separated, we imply that there's a disconnection between them and we emphasize their differences rather than their similarities. And in doing so, we might even come to see them as opposing one another or in conflict with one another. So when a person believes that they're a spiritual being and that it's quote unquote good to be a spiritual person, they often create a separation between themselves and others who they believe are not spiritual people. By creating this idea of good in their mind, they at the same time create the idea of bad. And again, all these things we think are good and bad are just ideas. And really, when you get to the root of it, these ideas were never really ours to begin with. We didn't invent them. They were given to us in the form of languages and symbols by others. We like to think that our ideas and our thoughts and emotions are our own, but really, we think in terms of words, numbers, and pictures which we ourselves did not invent. They were given to us by our parents, peers, and our society. What happened is we internalized these ideas and eventually came to call them our own. It's important for someone on this path to recognize that even though we like to think that these belief systems that we hold on to so dearly are ours, they're often actually shaped by cultural norms. They're a product of the messages we've been exposed to in our environment. They're a result of the many ways we've been influenced by others in our community, in our tribe. By becoming aware of this, we begin to challenge these beliefs and the emotions that come with them. If you want to try an incredibly powerful exercise, sit down and really spend some time examining the nature of your desires. Examine the nature of your motivations on the deepest levels. Try to get to the root of what you really want. Drop the idea that being selfish is a bad thing and consider it a starting point of spirituality instead. Consider being selfish as a spiritual pursuit in self-exploration and personal growth. By doing so, by going into the feeling of being selfish, you'll find that you can gain insight into what truly motivates you and what you really want out of life. Not what society has told you that you should want, but what you really want. So rather than denying or suppressing your selfish desires, explore them in a non-judgmental way, with the goal of understanding yourself better. If you do this, if you immerse yourself into it, this exercise can help you learn to distinguish between your genuine desires and the societal expectations that have been ingrained in you. This is ultimately the way to take responsibility for your own happiness and fulfillment. This is how you'll live an authentic and truly successful life, because this kind of self-care and self-love is a means to aligning with your true desires and eventually manifesting them. As long as you have positive intentions and you're mindful about your priorities, about what's truly important, there's no shame in having nice things or enjoying the pleasures life has for us. There's nothing honorable about needless suffering or living life deprived. It's not noble to struggle to make ends meet, and anyone who tries to shame you for creating your own is caught up with their own conflicting ideas. They're caught up with their own separation between their desires and societal expectations. They're playing the game of I'm holier than you, and my belief system is better than yours. These people are attached to their ideas, to the words and pictures in their heads. They've let their imagination separate you from them. If you're truly living life to your highest ideal, you'll recognize this pitfall. You'll recognize the materialism people have brought forth into their own spirituality. When a person gets so caught up in their idea of what it means to be a spiritual person, they separate themselves from others in reality and live solely in their imagination. In this sense, they're no different from those extreme materialists who truly are selfish and greedy and would do anything, even harm others, to get what they want. Both of these people, the extreme spiritualist and the extreme materialist, are caught up in the trap of confusing their thoughts for reality. One just has their head in the dirt and the other has their head in the clouds. That's why they can't stand on the level with one another to understand each other. The materialist thinks the spiritualist is naive and airy-fairy, while the spiritualist thinks the materialist is primitive and dense. They're both guilty of the same thing, of separating themselves from the other and positioning themselves as someone better. Yet, they both condemn each other. Your spirituality should never separate you from another person. If it ever does, it's a sign that you've gone to the extreme. It's important that we recognize that we are no more special than any other individual. You are life manifesting itself as this being here, and they are life manifesting itself as that being there. Terms like ego or higher self and higher vibration are terms for distinction, not separation. There's nothing better about a higher self or higher vibration than a lower one. To understand my point, you can think in terms of sounds and music. When one tone is higher, we don't assume that it's better than a lower tone. The higher tones have their place and so do the lower ones. That's what gives sounds variety and makes music great. So the true spiritual path is one of inner exploration, and that involves the darkness along with the light. And if we're to use our spirituality as a vehicle for change and growth, we must be ready to accept that there's no difference between a spiritual experience and an ordinary experience in reality. Reality just is. Life just is. The question is, are we exploring its depths beyond the distinctions, or are we looking for ways to create separation?